Welcome to the Indian Ocean World podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Indian Ocean World podcast. My name is Philip Gooding, a postdoctoral fellow at the Indian Ocean World Centre, McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Today, I am joined by Professor Angela Schottenhammer, Professor of the Chinese Middle Period and Early Modern Global History in the Faculty of Arts at KU Leuven, Belgium. Professor Schottenhammer is also the founding director of the Crossroads Research Centre and, in cooperation with Shanghai University, the founding director of the Institute for the History of Economic Interactions. Professor Schottenhammer is the author and editor of several important publications, including most recently a 2-volume publication in the Palgrave series in Indian Ocean World Studies, entitled Early Global Interconnectivity Across the Indian Ocean World. She is also a partner of the Indian Ocean World Centre's Appraising Risk project and the principal investigator of several other projects, including a European Research Council funded project entitled The Structure and Impact of Trans-Pacific Trade, 16th to 18th centuries, the Manila Galleon Trade Beyond Silver and Silks. In addition to a Goethe Henkel Foundation funded project entitled Seafaring, Trade and Knowledge Transfer. Today, Professor Schottenhammer is going to discuss some of the work she and her team have been conducting for the IWC's Appraising Risk project. Angela, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Firstly, can you just give an overview of your research? What have you been investigating? And where has this taken you in terms of thematic direction?
Okay. I would just like to give you a brief summary of our activities that actually have taken us from storms and typhoons via ocean currents and diseases up to the problem of piracy in the East Asian waters. And most recently, we have, or especially me, I have particularly concentrated on the question of the transfer of diseases and medicinal knowledge and the dissemination of medicinal drugs. So let me first start maybe with 2 examples that refer to problems of storms and typhoons that crews, of course, met when traveling the seas. Shipwrecks, of course, attest to typhoon disasters, and maritime archaeology, I have to add, is also one of the major focuses that we are investigating within these various projects. One of the most prominent examples is perhaps the attempted invasion of Japan by the Mongol ruler of China, Kublai Khan. Twice he tried to invade Japan, in 1274 and in 1281. Both times the Mongol fleet encountered intense tropical cyclones or hurricanes, which the Japanese called kamikaze. This is literally meaning divine winds, because Japan was in the end just saved from being invaded by the Mongol troops. In fall 1274, about 200 warships sank off the coast of Hakata. This is in southwest Japan, Kyushu, and approximately 13,500 people drowned. Similarly, in summer 1281, the Mongol fleet met with a typhoon and sank off Takashima Island. Approximately 100,000 people died in that disaster. One of my team members, Dr. Kimura Jun from Tokai University in Japan, he has been involved in the recovery of the sunken fleet of Kublai Khan in cooperation with a team of maritime archaeologists and the Japanese government. And if you Google just the lost fleet of Kublai Khan, you will definitely find some other podcasts and also video documentations on this event. So this was really something quite new that archaeologists, maritime archaeologists, finally just discovered relics of this sunken fleet. Now, climate historians have now found out that both years, 1274 and 1281, were so-called El Niño years, when sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean rose above average, causing, for example, a reversal or redirection of the regular east-west winds, so that the chances that typhoons rather hit Northeast Asia, Japan, than South China increased. This is also quite interesting because this is something people didn't know in the past. Let me provide you with another example. This stems from the Spanish Manila galleon trade. The Spanish, as is known, initiated a trans-Pacific galleon trade between Acapulco and Manila that was officially operating between 1565 and 1815. Here we have an incident that occurred roughly 300 years later than the attempted invasion of Japan by Kublai Khan. This is the incident of a galleon called San Felipe from 1596, and it happened during a dangerous passage through some islands southeast of Japan. This galleon, San Felipe, had left the Manila Bay on July 11, 1596, with lots of cargo and valuables. On July 28, the galleon eventually disembarked from the Philippine island archipelago. So you can already see that they had been traveling in the seas of the Philippine archipelago already for half a month, more or less. Due to contrary winds, navigation remained difficult. And on coming closer to the waters southeast of Japan, the crew met with various strong hurricanes. I just briefly quote from a diary, just a sentence here. In a passage at the tip of Japan on the 28th of September, so about 2 months later, the weather started to become threatening. And within a very small period of time, a very strong hurricane came up with fateful winds, so that within just 4 hours, we were about to lose ourselves. In October 1596, eventually, the San Felipe wrecked in Urado on the coast of the Japanese island of Shikoku. This is the main Japanese island, en route from Manila to Acapulco. The galleon had been carrying a cargo that valued more than 1.5 million pesos. Crew and passengers could disembark safely, and obviously from the Japanese side, there were originally no plans to confiscate the galleon or its cargo. After, however, the chief pilot of the San Felipe, the Spanish chief pilot, showed the Japanese a world map with all these Spanish possessions, and then incautiously told them, obviously in order to intimidate them, that it was Spanish tactics to first infiltrate missionaries in foreign countries in order to pacify the people, and then conquer the countries with their military. The ruler of Japan, Hideyoshi, was of course upset and decided to confiscate the galleon. And here we have a nice diary of all that was happening. So we know about this. And also here we have some archaeological relics. This incident of the San Felipe also briefly refers to another problem that the ships encountered when sailing here, this region of the East Asian waters, namely ocean currents. I only want to provide a very brief example. This is the so-called black current, or kuroshio in Japanese. And this is a very strong ocean current that is passing east of Taiwan, the Ryukyu Islands, and Japan, flowing to the northeast into the direction of the Aleut Islands, further on to Alaska, and then to the west coast of North America. And in combination with strong westerly and northwesterly winds, of course, these currents have definitely posed a major threat also for seafarers navigating these waters. And the Spanish actually have for a very long time trying to find an ideal way to get back from Manila, from Southeast Asia, back to America, until they really discovered how to use this ocean current. We also have maps that attest to the fact that the currents are very, very strong, and that fishermen, for example, should be very careful and never dare to move beyond these ocean currents. Let me now come to my major topic, the question of diseases, medicines, medicinal knowledge, and medicinal drugs. What did the crew do if, for example, somebody got sick on board, or if they needed a physician, a surgeon? I have to add that here I will only just basically go into Spanish documents, but of course we have documents from basically all the seafaring nations that just crossed the oceans. And definitely crossing the Pacific was even more difficult and more dangerous than crossing the Indian Ocean. The role of ship surgeons in Spanish documents, it's called cirujano, evolved originally from barbers, especially from the English documents. We have lots of descriptions about what barbers are doing. What we know about ship surgeons stems mainly from travel diaries, manuscripts recording cargo or personal belongings, or other official documents related to transoceanic travels. But we do interestingly also have some archaeological evidence, like travel or doctor kits. So let me give you a few examples. In 1586, one of the Spanish Manila galleons called San Martin carried a cargo for almost 200 different persons. When the galleon San Martin left Manila, it obviously made a detour in order to trade with the Chinese at Macau and load there a large quantity of Chinese goods. This, of course, does not only attest to the fact that there was lots of contraband trade and smuggling, because officially it was not allowed to take all these Chinese commodities on board, but it also attests to the fact that most of these galleons were loaded with such a big quantity of cargo that it really posed a big problem to their stability on water. They were too heavy, and we have so many records and documents that really speak about overloading of these galleons, and also of leaving the harbor too late. We have seen the other galleon left in July 11. This was already quite late when they made a detour, and then it took them maybe another month to get cargo in Macau. And then they were already at the beginning of August. So the chances of running into a typhoon increased tremendously. And this was a big, big problem. The San Martin, to come back to our question of surgeons, also had a ship surgeon, a barbero y cirujano, on board. His name was Agustin Sanchez. Basically, nothing is known about his person, but we possess an interesting document with a very long list of goods he carried on board. Part of Sanchez's belongings was, I enumerate here from the manuscript, a small box with its key, filled with cup-shaped containers used for mixing substances, such as herbs or medicines, some letters, some so-called sanglay cases. Sanglay, this is the European designation of the Chinese in the Philippines. It's believed to be derived from the Chinese term changlai, or those who come frequently. Then some wine, vino de la tierra, a pot, probably a large ceramics jar of Chinese spirits, una tinaca de vino de China. And of course, he also carried medicinal things on board. Interestingly, also 6 forceps for the extraction of back teeth, barber equipment, including mirrors. And the irons or equipment, forceps to pull back teeth, I have discovered this so frequently in other manuscripts as well, that I was thinking about maybe toothache or something like this really must have been a major problem, because it's really mentioned so frequently in all these manuscripts. Also, another ship surgeon who was active around 1600, he also carried among his belongings a bag with 5 iron tools to pull back teeth, a cautery, a small bronze minaret with an iron handle, and a small grinding stone. So also from these kind of descriptions, including archaeological relics that we find on shipwrecks, we can get some insights into what these ship surgeons were using on board. From an English barber and surgeon who had some experience as a surgeon in the army early in his career, we possess an illustrated manual called The Surgeon's Mate. And this manual by this ship surgeon called John Woodall, who later joined the British East India Company, had become then quite popular, and crews just used it on board of ships. Another wreck that sank in 1600, the so-called San Diego, also had some surgeon's instruments on board. So this is how we somehow can try to reconstruct what ship surgeons were using on board. Let me just briefly come back to the Spanish surgeon, Agustin Sanchez, because he interestingly also carried various books placed in a box with keys on board. In total, 19 old books about surgery and handwritten notes. Handwritten notes, this tells us that he was also making notes when he was curing some patients or doing something on board of ships. Other sources now show us that one was apparently also well aware that distancing was quite important on board, and that the little space available was quite conducive to the spread of diseases. I have investigated a Chinese document that talks in detail about these problems. Also that for economic reasons, now people try to save money and build the ship smaller, and this just is very conducive to the spread of diseases on board of ships. We have examples when in emergency situations, people were asked to proceed on deck to breathe fresh air and leave more room for those who have to remain in the hull, in the ship, to breathe fresh air and distancing. These are all problems we are only too familiar with now during the actual COVID situation. To summarize, through such sources, we have tried to piece together and reconstruct what happened on board in certain emergency situations, how at least basic medical care was secured, which books and medicinal tools as well as medicinal drugs were carried on board. And we investigate the networks of medicinal drugs and medicinal knowledge across oceans. Let me conclude, if I still have the time, with one concrete example. I would like to introduce camphor. What we know as camphor, as a rule, refers to an oleoresin, also called camphor oil. It is an essential oil obtained by distillation of crushed parts of camphor wood and bark, or by directly gaining the resin, cutting the tree. Historical use and distribution of camphor are complex, as different names were circulating, referring to partly different plants. The greatest confusion probably arises from the fact that camphor as a chemical composition is contained in various different plants. But I won't go here into details. Camphor acts antimicrobial and works, for example, against certain fungi and bacilli. Internally administered, it is a pulmonary antiseptic, a febrifuge, an analgesic and stimulant of the central nervous system. It may be applied against asthma, for example. Externally applied, it works as rubefacient and ointment against muscle pain, antiseptic and anti-rheumatic. Still today, some ointments against osteoarthritis or muscle relaxation contain camphor. Camphor is easily absorbed through the skin and also can be administered by injection, inhalation, and ingestion. For example, the famous tiger balm, and I'm pretty sure not only the China historians and sinologists among us have heard about tiger balm, contains a significant percentage of camphor. So it may wonder little that camphor was part of most pharmacies, and due to its wide range of possible applications, also valued on board of ships. And we have here one concrete example also. This is a book that also the Spanish surgeon Agustin Sanchez carried on board. I think, if I recall correctly, even two examples, two copies of this book. This is called Cirugía Universal, Universal Surgery, by a certain Juan Fragoso, who lived in the 16th century, 1530 to 1597. He was a physician and botanist from Toledo and also the surgeon of Philip II. And he also introduces camphor and all the details and applications for what it can be used. And this book was one of the major handbooks that at least Spanish surgeons had on board for consultation. There is no time to provide other examples, but we could introduce various other medicinal drugs that were used not only in the pharmacies of that time, but we know from manuscripts that they have also been carried on board of ships from lists of inventories and the like, and that they have also been applied just when young people got sick or needed maybe some other surgery or some medicinal help, for example, after a war, a naval war, or after a pirate attack. So I would like to conclude here, and I think we can then, if there are still questions, just open a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Schottenhammer. I think I have two questions, one for each part of your presentation, essentially. So I think I'll ask them in the same order that you discussed them in your presentation. I suppose my first question refers to shipwrecks and the risk of being shipwrecked. How common were shipwrecks? And how did sailors mitigate the chances of being wrecked? How did they try to avoid typhoons? How did they try to avoid being lost on unknown currents? You mentioned, it seems in some instances, that they went against patterns that would have helped them mitigate risk, for example, by leaving too late in the season, increasing the chance of hitting typhoons, and also by being too heavy and overloaded. So again, are there other strategies that they employed to try and avoid being wrecked?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, because actually when you study these documents, you will find that they actually thought this is a calculable risk. And most ships, really most ships, didn't leave early enough. And most ships were actually overloaded. So even though people knew about the risk, they still thought that they somehow maybe they could calculate the risk. We have only really probably very few examples that ships were not overloaded and that they left in time. Of course, then in the end, the Spanish crown, for example, was looking for culprits. And we have huge piles of documents discussing who actually was responsible for that. Was it the local governor who didn't take care that the ship left in time, or some local merchants who wanted to load on more cargo, or was it a pilot error? Of course, sometimes also the missing experience of a pilot, of the captain or so, this also led to shipwreck. But I would guess that in the majority of cases, actually, people just calculated the risk and thought somehow maybe we are lucky and we can escape it.
That's very interesting. Does religion play a big role here?
Yes, of course. Then also we see this also on the Chinese side, that they, of course, were praying a lot then and hoped that nothing would happen. But especially yet now concerning the Manila galleon trade, I think we see very frequently that they just calculated the risk, because obviously, very obviously, the money, the profit you could make with that was just too big in order just to not somehow calculate that you might get a chance not to wreck in these waters.
So you're kind of balancing like an economic versus an environmental risk,
Exactly.
which I think is very, very pertinent in the current pandemic circumstances and what you're doing, how locked down we should exactly be. All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for that answer. My other question relates to medicinal practice and exchanges of knowledges. How were ship surgeons' practices and knowledges affected by encounters in the Indian Ocean world, or specifically in the Philippines or in China, which you've mostly discussed here? You mentioned a Chinese document which recommended distancing in times of outbreaks of disease. You also mentioned, gave us a lot of details on comfort. Essentially, how did Spanish surgeons, for example, gain knowledge of these practices? Were they practices that they already knew about, or did they learn them from, I suppose, specialists in the Indian Ocean world itself?
Yeah, of course, this was a kind of, in terms of Spanish surgeons, this was a Spanish, of course, tradition. Sometimes if you study these documents, you will be surprised that there seems to be a relatively little exchange among the European scientists of the time. Of course, it was also a question of competition at that time. But on the other hand, of course, they were also learning. And in terms of Spanish surgeons, for example, you have the missionaries also that were studying, of course, also local traditions, local medicinal drugs, local practices. And then, of course, also carried their knowledge to their countrymen. We have the same thing in the Indian Ocean. I think especially Indian Ocean companies like the Dutch or the British East India companies, they finally even hired specific surgeons or botanists or skilled personnel in order to study the local flora and fauna, and in order to get a better knowledge of the local conditions. We have lots of famous physicians. If you only think of Philipp Franz von Siebold, and then the Dutch East India Company, and Philipp Franz von Siebold went to Japan. But we have many, many other examples, especially when surgeons, botanists were really sent to India in order to study the local flora there, and then learn from it to compose manuals, and then they were distributed. And of course, also the people learned from the surgeons and physicians also learned from what the local people did, because for the Europeans, it was quite a different environment, and they had, for example, to adjust to the tropical climate, to new diseases that they were not used to. So if we look in detail, we find lots of really interchange and exchange.
Okay, so building on that, do we have exchange of knowledge going the opposite direction as well? Chinese physicians, for example, learning ostensibly European methods too. I suppose, is this a real formation of, quote, hybrid knowledges here?
Less, but we also do have examples of this. A well-known example that Qing Emperor, the Kangxi Emperor, he has been infected, or he got sick by malaria, and he was treated then by missionaries, and he was then also recommending this kind of medicines also among his court members. And in general, he was welcoming just missionaries and Jesuit knowledge in order to assist his own court people and the Chinese. So we also have the other way around, of course. Even though the examples, what we find in the sources, are not so frequent as the other way around, but we do have it. It's just a kind of a puzzle, and we have to put together some more examples.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Schottenhammer, for your time and for discussing your research and for answering my questions. I should also say thank you to Dr. Archibald Chowdhury and to René Mandeville, who have been working behind the scenes to turn this recording into a podcast. And thank you to you, the listener, for downloading. Once again, my name is Philip Gooding, and you have been listening to the Indian Ocean World podcast.
The Indian Ocean World podcast would like to acknowledge the generous support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. This podcast series is part of the SSHRC-funded partnership project Appraising Risk, Past and Present, interrogating historical data to enhance understanding of environmental crises in the Indian Ocean world.